yesterday, it was a few days ago.
Okay, so dedications, Kevin, before you give you a share.
For mother of Steve Noik, who passed away. Her funeral was today. Her name is Rasa Devora Bat Glika. May she have her neshama have an avia, and may the family be comforted and only have simchas.
So, on behalf of all of us who know Steve Noik very well, Stephen, you were an unbelievable son to your mother. The way you took care of her needs, both physiologically as well as psychologically, and the medication and the constant care and vigilance, in spite of obviously a lot of health irregularity. I know your mom went through years of it not being easy for her, and you're just a wonderful son, and I wish you and your family condolences from all of us. Um, and keep up the teaching, Stephen, because your Breslov teaching obviously gives us that sort of joy in Yiddishkeit and that purpose to take each day with new challenges with positivity. So thank you. Kevin, teach us before I start the Gemara share.
Okay, just something short, and this it's Musaf for all of us. And I've heard a couple of times recently in these shuls that I attend near where I live about talking in shul and about just general demeanor or behavior. And if one should as try as much as possible not to talk at all in shul, and especially during the repetition of the Amidah, and if someone is saying Kaddish, and during a Torah, the Kriyat Torah as well. But we shouldn't say, people say we shouldn't speak at all in shul, and that goes without saying. People using their phones and checking social media and their messages, and I've done this in the past. I haven't done it for a while, but one should try not walk out, go outside the Beit Knesset to do that. And unless, obviously, if it's a very urgent matter, you need to talk to someone inside the shul, of course, or inform something that's an incident that's related to the Kehillah. There are exceptions, of course, but you just have some conversation and answer your messages. Try not to. I'm talking to myself as well. Obviously, if there's a tzedakah, if there's someone coming collect tzedakah for an organization, obviously you can switch on your phone and type in the bank details while you're there. That's for a mitzvah and that, but we should try not to speak and use our phones in shul because it's not a normal place. It's a lahavdil. It's a holy place with a shekhinah. So just wanted to mention that.
Just on that particular note, one of the things that bugged me, and I'm not actually criticizing traditional shuls because people that drive to shul, at least they're having some sort of a connection. But I tell you what really does tick me off is that people know the right and wrong thing to do. And what bugs me is when you go to some of these big traditional shuls and they discussing sports or they're speaking at the top of their voices and you say to them, listen, I hope you don't mind. And you're very courteous and you say, I'm just praying to God. If you could just, like wait till the brocha to have your chats, they actually get very, very angry at you. And homicide is not, it's one of the 10 that Hashem doesn't like. And so I have to keep quiet because murder is not something he seems to
Yeah.
enjoy. But it just irritates me that people that have that little respect. It's one thing if they don't want to keep Shabbos and they're not on a level, but on a level where you're actually damaging somebody else's concentration is shocking. And this is the same
Uh,
from people. There's nothing worse when you're sitting next to somebody and they're davening, and they daven so loud that you actually have to turn around to them and say, God can hear you. What are you doing?
no,
So
you're not supposed to
uh, I'm
supposed to be.
saying, I'm saying things like this, just a lack of courtesy drives me crazy. So Kevin, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Let's go on the show. The other thing that does that I feel is, it mentions in Sanhedrin, by the way, Lance, I don't know if you know this. We learned in Sanhedrin when we were at Mahosha, they've taken certain parts out of Sanhedrin and other Masechtas. One of them is this JC thing. Apparently, he asked his teacher for forgiveness, and his teacher was saying the Shema, and his teacher never answered him or whatever. And he asked him a few times, and at that point, he went off the rails. And it's not that his teacher was wrong, but you know how many times there's been machloiket because somebody, for example, in a business meeting, I understand you can't shake a woman's hand or whatever, but sometimes people go, when they become bolsheviks, they get fanatical. They absolutely
Yeah.
get fanatical, and they are socially completely inappropriate. Sometimes when I first became frum, I'd have a laptop in my hand and say, sorry, I'd love to shake your hand up, just my hands are busy, and make a conscious effort beforehand to have a decent social cue or shake somebody's hand. It doesn't mean you're going to jump their bones if you shake their hand. I don't get it. There's just, or when somebody says hello and you're sure and you just wave and some sort of a cue. That's also important. All right, let's get to the Gemara. So we're learning one last rule of Rav Yehuda. Now, Rav Yehuda has been quoting two to nine. He's been quoting Rav and he's been quoting Shmuel. So this is another ruling by Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav. And he said, if a barrel filled with water fell into the great sea, the person who immersed himself there at the site in the sea where the barrel fell is not purified by his immersion. He remains tamei, spiritually impure. The reason is that we're concerned that there should not be 3 login of drawn water floating in one place, which would cause the person to remain in a state of tamei, which is spiritual impurity. So basically, the Great Sea, it's known as the Mediterranean Sea. One of the reasons it's using that example is that a mikveh is a body of salt water, not a sweetwater lake, etc. It's using a specific sort of example. Now, one of the factors that come into play is what you call river flow or stream flow or ocean flow. The minute there's flow, we're not worried that there'd be 3 lugin of drawn water that would prevent the mixing and the carrying away of that drawn water into ocean water so that a mikveh immersion can occur. So basically, Rashi explains that the person is still in a state of spiritual impurity. Why is he tamei? Because part of his body may have emerged from the immersion in the drawn water. Now, one thing, the sages promulgated that if a person who is tamei immersed in a valid mikveh to become tarhor, which is spiritually pure, he becomes tamei again if later on the same day he immersed his head or most of his body in drawn water. Where's that? In Zavim, in the 5th daf. What Zav deals with is seminal emissions. That's one of the Gemaras that deals with it. You've got Gemara Shabbos in 14a, mentions it there too. So the tumah status of a person immersing in the area where the barrel had fallen obviously would be a rabbinic one. Why? Because tumah is a limited one, disqualifying him from touching or eating truma, especially as a Kohen. Primary tumah, guys, you've got to know this, would be removed by his immersion. We're only concerned that after the valid immersion, his body may have passed through the drawn water and require a further dunking because he's acquired a state of rabbinic tumah, because the drawn water is taken in a vessel that in fact has got spiritual impure water. So Rav's ruling has to be clarified a bit further. It said, look, if only the barrel fell into the Great Sea, there's an issue. It's relatively stationary, the Mediterranean Sea. There's no waves or current. Therefore, only in this particular case where the body of water doesn't flow are we concerned that the contents will remain in one place. But if the barrel fell into an ordinary river, this concern doesn't apply, because we can safely assume that the river's current has dispersed the contents of the barrel by the time the person has actually immersed. So how do we know that this is the issue? There's a brisa in support of Rav's ruling, and it speaks of a case of wine rather than water. So we learned that principle in a brisa as well. If a barrel filled with wine fell into the great sea, the person who immersed himself there is not purified by his immersion. Okay, so how does this relate to the issue before? We said that in this case, we're concerned that part of the person's body might have been in the wine during the immersion, thereby invalidating it. So what we are saying is, even if the smallest part of a person's body remains outside of the water of the mikveh, the immersion is invalid. So if part of the body immersed in wine floating in the sea, he's not actually being immersed in the sea at the same time. So this is a slightly nuanced difference, because we said anything other than drawn water doesn't contract tumah. However, if wine or any other liquid is not mikveh water, then in fact you're not getting an immersion. Because what we said before, and this was one of the nuances, is that if you had less than 40 se'ah and you had 3 lugin of wine, it might not invalidate the mikveh, but it doesn't complete it. So what you would need is 40 se'ah of rainwater or the like. So what we're worried about here is not that the drawn water would create tumah. It's the fact that in the first place there's no proper immersion, because that water hasn't been distilled by the water's current, because it's a still body of water, and therefore a proper immersion hasn't been valid. Okay. So we see from the brisa that the sages were indeed concerned with the possibility that part of the barrel's contents can remain together at the site where they fell in the sea. So Rav, what does he do? He merely extends this principle to the barrel of a water. And we are concerned that there should not be 3 lugin of drawn water floating in one place, meaning that that's one issue of concern, that the drawn water actually creates tumah because it's had vessels that have touched impurity. But the other one is even 3 lugin of wine prevents an immersion of a valid mikveh to start with. So the one is a rabbinical concern, the one is a derisa concern. So the brisa continues with further ramifications of the ruling, and the case which continued now is an issue we discussed in the previous case, and we say, all right, so that's regarding a person. What about a loaf of truma bread? Okay, so the ruling isn't limited to truma. Even if the loaf weren't truma, it would be rendered tamei, spiritually impure. Why does the brisa mention truma? Is because it's only because of the problem of truma that it has a special spiritual significance, that a person that's consuming truma has to be in a state of tara, of purity. And therefore there's a special aspect to that. But if a woman has a menstrual period, or a guy has a seminal emission, you can affect both food and articles of clothing and utensils with that spiritual impurity. But truma is a specific consumption that has to be in a state of purity because of the spiritually elevated task at hand. So we're saying, okay, so you've got a loaf of truma, and that fell in the sea, the Great Sea, where there's not a lot of ocean movement, after the person has emerged. And we're saying that that means that the loaf of truma is tamei, it's spiritually impure, since his immersion was not valid, and therefore the person themselves is still in a state of tamei. We're also concerned that he contaminated the wine by touching it, if there 3 lugin of wine, because that wine in fact prevented the ocean from giving him a pure mikveh immersion. So consequently, if truma bread falls into the sea at that particular spot, it becomes tamei because of the possibility that it touched the now contaminated wine. So the Gemara questions this last part of the brisa, and it says, all right, so what is the lesson of this latter part of the brisa, which begins, and so also? Obviously, the person's immersion is invalid. He's rendered the wine tamei. which in turn renders the bread tameh. So why is it necessary to state the obvious? So the Gemara answers, it's not that obvious, because you might have said that we consider the status of a person who immersed, we maintain the person in his previous status as long as it's not clear that he's changed. So let me just explain to you what this halacha is in terms of default position. Is we say that the general rule for resolving legal questions arising from doubtful situations is to assume that the previous legal status has not changed until it has been proven to have changed. So this legal principle is known as a chazaka, and it's in Gemara Chulin 10b, and basically it's used for both a stringency and a leniency. How could it be used for a stringency? Well, if 3 times a person has been in a state of impurity, they're not going to get given a leniency that she's able to have relations with her husband. That's a stringency. A leniency is if she's been in a state of purity, unless proven otherwise, then it's a state of leniency based on the previous position. So I'm just going to mention the principle before, because you're going to use this again and again. So what's this general rule for resolving legal questions? Any doubtful situation, you got to look at the status quo at least 3 times before, and that previous legal status, if it hasn't changed, it's not going to change. So that's a stringency and a leniency. So we say, okay, so what does that have to do with this particular case? That with regards to the bread, if where we consider the status of a person who immersed, we maintain the person in his previous state, if it's not clear that he changed, he said, look, the person had been tameh, impure, before his immersion. And now there's basically some doubt whether he became pure by immersing, because we don't know if the wine dispersed. Obviously, if it's 3 lugin of drawn water, for sure, that might even add to the contamination. But with wine, it doesn't add to the contamination, but it certainly doesn't clear if there's no ocean current or water body current able to allow the purer water to mikvah him. And the law dictates that we resolve this doubt by assuming that his previous status didn't change and he's still in a state of spiritual impurity. Okay? So, in other words, we make the legal assumption that he did immerse in the wine, and therefore he's tameh. He never became in a state of tara, purity. So, basically, following this line of reasoning, it could be argued that here, where we consider the status of truma bread that fell into the same area, maybe we should do the same thing. In other words, maybe we should maintain the previous status of the truma. So this is what we say in bottom line. Since the truma had not been tameh before it fell into the sea, it was ordinary truma. It did not contract spiritual impurity. So maybe we can continue to assume that it didn't become tameh as a result of falling into an area that only could possibly be tumah. Possibly. So the brisa therefore makes it clear to us that the loaf is also tameh, because we don't follow the rule in this case. So what we are saying is here, the bread wasn't spiritually impure. This person didn't get a valid immersion, and therefore, we're not sure if he did. He's still in the state of impurity. So we are saying, okay, so we realize that he's no longer purified, but why would the truma bread become impurified? Because it was pure in the state before. So what we are saying is we don't keep the chazaka rule that the truma bread was in a state of purity. We are saying that we've got to go in the stringent position that now that it's been next to a person in a body of water, that he's probably not validly in a state of purity, that it also contracted at this point tameh, spiritual impurity. And we have to have a stringency and not go that the truma bread before wasn't tameh, and therefore why is it tameh now? So the principle doesn't work here because we're adding astringency. That's about it, guys. Any questions before we finish this year? It was just a small part and we're doing something tomorrow.
Lance was first.
Lance, yeah?
Okay, lots of questions here, okay?
I can hardly.
Okay, firstly,
Yeah.
what I mentioned before with a modern mikveh, you've got your kosher volume of 340 liters underground, connected with a pipe to the 100,000 liters that's in the normal mikveh. And when you go to a mikveh, you know that it's regular tap water, it's got chlorine in it, and that's connected with a pipe to the kosher section. Now you're talking about in the ocean, in the Mediterranean Sea. You've got a billion liters of kosher water, okay? A billion, at least a billion, okay? Now, small, fat, 300 liters falls into it. And suddenly that section of the Mediterranean isn't kosher for a mikveh? That doesn't make sense.
Can I answer your question?
Sure.
Okay, so there are 2 points the Gemara brings. The first one is that here in the Mediterranean Sea, one of the big concerns is there's no water currents or no flow of water. We're not concerned if you have, there's 2 points. The first one is that there's no flow. So we're worried that it's going to transgress a rabbinical immersion. Because even if some of it was ocean water, and then afterwards it didn't disperse and he dunked himself and some of it was other liquid, then that's known as rabbinical tumah, meaning once you've had a valid mikveh, you can't then go into drawn water until that evening. Do you get what I'm saying? That's not derisive, that's rabbinic. They don't want a person to, once they've gone to a mikveh, to have drawn water on top of them. So that's the one concern. The other concern is that the water hasn't dissipated. So it's not about the fact that there are thousands of liters. The place that he's standing in, that water isn't rainwater or ocean water, etc. The barrel opened up where he is, and he didn't dunk himself in a valid mikveh. If it was drawn water, he would for sure be tumah, because that would itself be tumah. We're saying even if it's wine and wine isn't tumah, it's got a neutral status, he himself hasn't got rid of his contamination. And that's the issue.
So I think what's in question here actually is the Mediterranean a valid mikveh? That's the question. I know in Cape Town, people go to the ocean to use as a mikveh. Before women get married, some go to the ocean rather than go to a... So I know that obviously a regular ocean is a mikveh. The Mediterranean, the whole thing is in question then.
No, it's not.
Flowing.
It's not in question, because what they're saying is, firstly, there's such a lot of water that even if you had a lake, it could be valid as long as it's attached to the ground and everything else. The point in question is the person is standing in a place where he's not fully submerged in that mikveh water. The barrel opened up where he was by, and it didn't dissipate to the extent that we can guarantee that he had a proper immersion. That's the issue. It had nothing to do with the Mediterranean. You
Okay,
get the only reason the Mediterranean was mentioned is because in and of itself, when you've got a body of water where there's a massive current, it would dissipate in its own within a few minutes and you'd be safe. There's no issue with the Mediterranean.
So,
Just hang on, Kev. Lance is still on. I just want to make sure it's clear before I go on to you.
I think one must be vigilant if you go to the Mediterranean to make sure there's no objects lying around in the water. If it all looks clear within a few meters, let's say 10, 20 meters away from you, you're fine.
They're just saying liquid dispersion is a problem because you have to submerge yourself in the Mediterranean, number one, Lance. And they're saying that if there's other liquid that passes by, but the chiddush here was the status that if purebred, because this Zav or this person was spiritually impure, he's using the mikveh, he's using the Mediterranean Sea to purify himself. The whole chiddush here was truma bread that was in a kosher status before is now doesn't retain its previous status like a chazaka. It's assumed that it's contracted this person's tumah because he never had a valid immersion, and therefore it's susceptible to contractibility of tumah. That was the chiddush. But there's no issue with the Mediterranean Sea. You just know if another body of liquid, drawn water for sure, would have to be dispersed because that alone would make somebody tumah. But even wine, you're not getting rid of your tumah. That's the issue. But there's no issue with the Mediterranean Sea. Just
So
one
the
thing.
oak, Damon, just practically in a simple, the guy went to go to the Mediterranean to immerse himself. Then wine came along. There was wine that happened to come into across his path, and the water wasn't. So the wine interfered with the pure ocean water. That's what happened.
Correct. In practical thing, he didn't get a proper immersion.
And the bread, you're talking about the
other problem, Kev, is that even if you did get a valid immersion, if you have liquid coming into you after that period, before sunset, it's rabbinical tumah.
And because the wine came in contact with his body, he wasn't pure, and he touched the bread, and he was still in a state of tumah, and he made the bread tameh.
No, he didn't touch the bread.
The tumah.
So
how did the bread become?
What we're saying there is that because he was not in a state of purity, and it didn't take away his tumah because it wasn't mikveh water, because it was mixed with the wine. Now all of a sudden, from the bread being in a pure state, we can't say the truma bread keeps its previous status because it was kosher. It's now seen to have, by default position, got infected with tumah.
The bread, you're saying?
The truma bread, yeah. So we can't.
So
I don't know what it says about soggy bread, about how you'd consume it, but that's a different issue. Just one thing, Lance, does it make sense, the issues? It's not so.
Yes. Okay, so the next question was also what Kevin's touching on is truma bread. You're talking about the bread falls into the water, then it becomes impure. But I mean, if the bread falls into the water, I wouldn't want it anyway.
But that's exactly what I just said. You're not going to want to eat the truma bread anyway. It's going to become dumplings. I'm just kidding.
So, Damon, you could say you can actually we can continue a bit longer. They just cancelled my.
No, I've got to go.
So as long as Damon, the guy was obviously loafing, we didn't realize that the wine was coming. Afterwards, he whined about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
All right, guys, we're starting a new Mishnah tomorrow. It's going to be quite complicated. And I'm going to try and make it simple with the chart from Rav Schottenstein, but it's quite complicated coming forward. What we did was...
Wait, I've got one for Kevin, and then he ends off saying this is too much for me.
That's very good. That's very
too much for me, yeah.
Yes, but I couldn't say it like that because it is too much. All right. Okay, guys. Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Cheers.